Good morning. It is Friday, April 10th, 7:48 a.m. I am clean shaven. Little razor burn I had over here this morning. Brooksy, Logan Brooksy always says I look 10 years younger shaved, so I'll take that. It's funny, you know, oldest kids, 19, 18, so girls. And when I was going to school with them, uh, I was a young dad. Now I've got my youngest two are boys, with my youngest is 7, going to be 8 this summer. But now people think I'm a grandpa, when I'm in there. So it's a change of perspective. But I'll take the 10 years younger, if that's what Brooksy thinks, and I always do feel good, clean shaven. Now I need a haircut. So it's maybe on the agenda today. Usually talk to Sanjay every morning. He called. I'm going to talk to him. I was on a phone call. I'm going to do this. I'm going to eat some breakfast and call him on a walk this morning. I got cut off yesterday. I thought Turbo Cat Aaron said something funny. He said, "What was the text that Travis could have gotten to end the podcast so abruptly?" And Donald Motu said, "There's only one thing." you know, he's on the right track. So, but it's in the morning. House is free. Kids are at school, so I can podcast on my heart's content here. I wanted to mention yesterday. I love history. My dad did a bunch of stuff. He was in the Air Force, then like a steel worker, then did like going to construction, like plumbing and heating, air conditioning business, and then he became a teacher. He was a special ed teacher. He got in trouble because he tried to get the kids to do new things, and he took them swimming, and it was a disaster because the kids didn't know how to swim, and he got in trouble for that. But then he eventually became a history teacher, so he lived a lot in his relatively short life. He died at 64 in 2011. So, but he loved history. I've always loved history, and I've started. When I do these podcasts, but also I've been journaling and I make these notes. I use these like little I write them down on paper. I read these Japanese studies that from longevity and especially memory and Alzheimer's, and they said that if you write by hand, it really helps in brain development and combating the brain faltering as you age. So I always write some notes when I do these podcasts. And one of the things I wanted to talk about yesterday I didn't get to was I love history. I'm a history nerd. Yesterday, April 9th, 1965, was when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. Appomattox is where he surrendered. Lee dressed in his best, dress that he had at the time. Grant was mud covered because he had spent the night riding, and so they met at the home of a grocer, William McLean. Met in his parlor. Uh, it was notable because Grant sent the Confederate soldiers home with their weapons, their sidearms, and their horses. He didn't imprison them. Uh, Grant introduced Lee to his staff, including Lieutenant Colonel Eli Parker, who was a Seneca Indian. He was there. And Grant and Lee reminisced about their shared experience in the Mexican War. Remember, they had gone to West Point and fought in the Mexican War together. Lee's troops were starving, so Grant sent 25,000 rations of food for their soldiers. And when Lee was riding away, the Union troops were cheering, and Grant said, "Don't do that." He stopped them and showed respect. In turn, Lee stopped his men from guerrilla warfare tactics generally, and the ceremonial surrender was just a few days later. Union General Josh Chamberlain had his soldiers salute their Confederate counterparts. I always thought that was touching. And then, amazingly, just 5 days later after that, Lincoln was assassinated at the Ford Theater by James Wilkes Booth, who is he was an actor and he was a Confederate sympathizer. So that was hard to believe. 5 days after Lee and Grant meant to surrender, Lincoln was shot. So think about that from just the events that were happening. So You know, also, Murray Stahl passed away on April 7th. He was the founder of Horizon Kinetics. I've used that. I'll link some articles where I've used Horizon Kinetics writing, Murray Stahl's writing. I didn't realize it, but he was 84 years old. So makes me feel like there's a lot of life ahead, a lot of things we can accomplish here, and but he passed away. So rest in peace to Murray Stahl, one of the luminaries in the investment world, somebody I really looked up to. I loved reading his writing, his quarterly letters. And Murray, he Jordan's calling me now. Jordan's at a trading academy in New York. I'll have to call him back. He's walking. He rented an apartment there for a month, and he's working for a hedge fund trading academy. But I'm going to call him back. Um, Speaking of the markets, yesterday I was going into uh, what a rally we've had the last 7 days, and um, I was also talking about the dichotomy or the divergence in the market, in that like Microsoft was down 22.9% year to date, Oracle was down 30.1%, Adobe was down 34.5%, the IGV software ETF was down 28. So and the Mag 7 in general has really underperformed what the markets have done. So that's telling you, and I mentioned yesterday, the breadth under the surface has been a lot better. The equal weight S&P is actually up 2.9% for the year, while the S&P is down 0.09. The Russell 2000 small cap value is up 9.5, while the Invesco QQQ Trust is down 1.7, and the Russell 2000 is actually at 5.6. So the market breadth has been very strong. I was discussing with Sanjay yesterday, that I was thinking, because I always run a long short book, and with the breadth so strong, it it and you're seeing leaders break out. The leading stocks have been really strong too. I don't know if it's because we had been generally in a correction since October. It's going to be really interesting in the next couple of weeks. Does this breadth carry us through to new highs, like kind of like we saw last year coming out of the tariff um, market sell off, and then it rebounded and you had resolution to the upside. And if that's the case, owning some of these downtrodden software stocks really makes sense here, right? Even as a hedge. And I was telling Sanjay, I was thinking of cutting some of my short exposure, um, and because these have they're down, so they've acted kind of as a market hedge and redeploying it there. And the fundamentals are supportive of that. Adobe closed at 229.94 yesterday. The earnings estimates are actually up a little bit for this year, but it's 23.49, so it's like a 10 PE. And earnings estimates next year are 26.36. It's got, I think, I model 17% free cash flow yield here. So, and I know people are worried about AI displacing the software stocks, but it's really cheap. Microsoft, 370, 307. Earnings estimates have actually risen this year to 1721. Next year, 1913. So cheaper than P market multiple. Oracle, similar. Earnings estimates are actually up this year for 26 to 745, and next year to 797, just up a little bit. So you're getting a less than market multiple PE, in Oracle's case, and they're investing. People are worried about their capex spend for the AI build out, and if that's a misallocation of capital, the market's punishing them. But you know, just from an earnings standpoint, the stock looks pretty cheap. And those software stocks look pretty cheap. Peabody's similar. Peabody's corrected. It got as high as 40. Just the last couple of weeks, it's down to 27.71. Earnings estimates for Peabody for 2027 have actually gone up the last 90 days from 356 to 418. So, really cheap, good balance sheet. It's got net cash, strong free cash flow. I mean, earnings estimates have come down a little bit for Peabody this year from 308 to 273, but it's still very cheap, in practicality.